Alright, so we've got a radiator. It's actually out of my Subaru Forester. I just went ahead and replaced it. So this is the old one. We're going to figure out why we want to make sure that we flush the cooler. Now in this radiator we have a transmission cooler that actually goes across the bottom tank, and it's got these nipple fittings where the hose just goes on and has a single hose clamp. They're held into the bottom tank with the nut. So first thing we're going to do is just remove these nuts, get them off of the nipples. I've already unclamped about half the tank off the core, so this will go a little bit quicker. Let's see how we get this off there. So we should be able to take all the nut all the way off. Now this radiator was replaced just because of its age, not because it had anything wrong with it. And this isn't something that we would normally do. To flush the radiator, or flush the transmission cooler in the radiator, all we're going to do is hook up a flush machine, or use brake clean, or a brake clean or some solvent, and you actually flush it in here, and you try to actually flush it in the back in the opposite direction of flow. So let's say this is the in and this is the out. You'd actually want to put your flush solvent here and then blow it out on this side. And at a minimum, you just take as much brake clean as you can to blow it in here, and then take your blowgun, put it against the nipple, and catch what comes out on this side, because you're going to blow it in with all the force, and you shouldn't have to worry too much about pressure. But if you're not sure, or if it's an expensive radiator, you might be careful on the pressure. So you see that I've actually lifted up the clamps for the radiator core, and we see that the bottom tank is starting to come loose. It should pop off once I get underneath it. There we go. Come over to this side, pry it off, and we get to see some of the anatomy of the radiator. So we've got right here the inside of the core, or the tank of the radiator, and we can see that this tube right here is the actual heat exchange element inside the tank of the radiator. So we just push this guy in, and then push this one in, and then we can lift it out, and we see that's all it is. So you can see it's actually hollow down through the center of it. See, it's hollow. So what it is, it's a double wall tube where we have coolant flowing in between the outer wall and the inner wall, and then, transmission fluid flowing in between the outer wall and the inner wall here, and then coolant actually runs through it to give it as much surface area as possible. So we see that it's got some buildup, but this is all coolant. So this is the coolant side of the picture. We're going to wipe this off, and you can see how, there's actually still transmission fluid inside this thing. So we're going to go ahead and cut it open. So to cut it open, I've just got some tin snips. We're going to give it a shot and see if we can cut down the length of this thing a little bit. And if not, we're going for the middle. One good thing to know about it is on these older ones, this tubing is actually going to be brass. So give me a minute. So we have the tube is now cut apart. I've cut the header off of one end, and then I've cut a tubing section out of the middle here, and we're going to see why. So why we would want to replace it as opposed to just flushing it. So you can see the two tubes inside there, and when I pull this apart, you're going to see a mechanism that they use to create as much surface area as possible. So here's the internal tube, okay, and that's where the coolant's actually going to flow through the center, and then the transmission fluid is going to be on the outside, and then we have the mesh, which creates a lot of surface area and contact. So if you look at this, you see that it's almost like a screen, but it's just a really heavy mesh inside there, and it creates a lot of surface area and a lot of contact. So what will happen is the temperature of the transmission fluid will be transferred to this, and because this is actually pressed into the casing and it's pushing against the outer housing and the inner housing, it transfers the temperature much more efficiently than if it were just fluid traveling through a tube. So we see this is why we don't want to just flush if a replacement radiator is available. Transmission fluid can flow through this, but all the trash that's going to go through this thing is just going to get stuck in all these little cavities and all these little tight spots. And the best thing to clean these things out is new transmission fluid from a new transmission. So we replace the transmission in this vehicle, we keep the old radiator, we might even flush it as best we can. We put the transmission, then the customer takes the vehicle and the vehicle comes back because the transmission, the new one, has failed because of debris contamination that came from the cooler. So this is why replacement is better than flushing.